The dust never settled on Haven Colony. It hung in the air like a permanent fog, turning the twin suns into pale orange circles. Nari Kang wiped the grit from her face and continued sorting through the pile of scrap metal outside her warehouse. 20 years she had been doing this. 20 years of quiet, simple work that asked nothing of her except patience. She was a small woman, thin and weathered by the harsh conditions of the outer rim. Her neighbors thought she was in her 50s, maybe 60s. They were wrong by several centuries, but that was a secret she intended to keep. The colonists on Haven were good people who minded their own business. Miners, traders, and salvage operators like herself. They had all come here to be left alone, and they extended that courtesy to each other. Nari heard the ships before she saw them. 3 Valkyrie patrol vessels, their engines screaming as they descended through the atmosphere. Her hands stopped moving. The metal piece she had been holding slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground. In 900 years of enforced peace, she had never seen Valkyrie military ships this far into neutral space. The vessels landed in the colony center, sending up massive clouds of dust. Nari watched from a distance as armored figures emerged. The Valkyrie were tall creatures, nearly 8 feet on average, with 4 arms and skin that looked like polished stone. Their faces were angular and sharp, with eyes that saw into the infrared spectrum. In the old days, they had been humanity's greatest enemy. In the new days, they were supposed to be friends. Commander Reith was the first to step onto Haven soil. His armor was decorated with medals and honors that Nari recognized from intelligence briefings she had memorized centuries ago. He was a career officer, probably never seen real combat. The 900 years of peace had made them soft. Behind him came a younger officer, Vekris, who carried himself with the arrogance of someone trying too hard to appear dangerous. The Valkyrie spread out through the colony, going door to door. They claimed to be searching for smugglers. The colonists cooperated because they had no choice. Nari continued working, hoping they would pass her by. She was just another salvage operator in a dusty warehouse. Nothing worth their attention. She was wrong. Vikris approached her warehouse with 3 soldiers behind him. His translator clicked as he spoke. "This structure will be searched. Move aside, human." Nari stood slowly, keeping her hands visible. "This is neutral space. You have no authority here without a warrant from the Galactic Union." Vekris tilted his head. The gesture might have been confusion or amusement. With Valkyrie, it was hard to tell. "You dare quote law to me? Move aside or be moved." "I know my rights," Nari said quietly. "You can contact the Union arbitrator. I will cooperate with proper authority." The young officer's hand moved to his weapon. "Your rights are what I say they are." Nari saw it coming. She had seen that look before, in 1,000 battles across 100 worlds. Pride and anger, and the need to prove something to the soldiers watching. She knew what would happen next. Part of her, the part that had stayed buried for 20 years, told her to move. To dodge, to disarm him before he could fire. But that part of her was supposed to be dead. That part of her had signed a treaty promising to never fight again. So she stood still. The shot took her in the shoulder, spinning her around and dropping her to the ground. The pain was white-hot and familiar. Vekris holstered his weapon and laughed. "Humans are so fragile. Learn respect." The Valkyrie walked away, returning to their ships. The colonists who had witnessed the shooting helped Nari to the medical station. The doctor, a young man named Dongmin, who had only been on Haven for 2 years, sealed the wound and gave her something for the pain. He kept asking if she wanted to file a complaint with the Galactic Union. Nari said nothing. She waited until dark, then returned to her warehouse. The building looked like any other salvage operation from the outside. Stacks of metal, broken machinery, and the accumulated junk of a dozen species. But beneath it all, hidden under false floors and behind shielded walls, was something else. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time. Nari moved through the darkness without needing light. Her hands found hidden panels and entered codes that had been old when the current Galactic Union was young. The floor split open, revealing stairs that descended deep into the bedrock of Haven Colony. The air below was cold and sterile, preserved by stasis fields that had been running for 2 decades. Her armor hung on the wall like a ghost, black and gray, covered in the adaptive camouflage that could mimic any environment. Next to it, her weapons waited. A rifle that could punch through starship hulls. Blades forged from materials that had been banned by 17 separate treaties. And the small device that had activated automatically when she was shot. The emergency beacon that she had hoped would never wake up. Nari touched the armor with her good hand. Her shoulder still ached, but it was already healing faster than it should. The modifications to her body were still active, still keeping her alive centuries after a normal human would have died of old age. She had been one of 15 soldiers chosen for a program that pushed the boundaries of what humanity could become. They had called themselves ghosts. The galaxy had called them nightmares. The beacon had been transmitting for 6 hours. That meant Admiral Taijin Park knew. President Hana Choi knew. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Union, officials were reading reports about a minor incident on a colony no one cared about. Having no idea that they were reading about the end of everything they had built. Got NAR, I began putting on her armor. Each piece clicked into place with mechanical precision, systems booting up and running diagnostics. Her heads-up display flickered to life, showing her information about the Valkyrie ships that were still in orbit above Haven. Their shields were down. Their weapons were cold. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. The last piece of her armor locked into place, and Nari Kong stopped being a salvage operator. She had spent 20 years pretending to be someone else, trying to believe that the soldier she had been was gone forever. But soldiers like her did not retire. They just waited. And now the waiting was over. Admiral Taijin Park was in a meeting with the Defense Committee when the alarm sounded. Not the general alarm that indicated some minor crisis or drill. This was different. This was a sound he had hoped never to hear again in his lifetime. Around the conference table, the other admirals and ministers looked confused. Only Taijin understood what it meant. He stood abruptly, cutting off the speaker mid-sentence. "This meeting is over. Everyone out, now." They argued, of course. Important people always argued when you told them what to do. But Taijin was not just any admiral. He was the commander of Earth's defense fleet, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty except for him and the communications officer who had triggered the alarm. "Show me," Taijin said. The display lit up with a signal analysis. The encryption was old, from systems that officially did not exist anymore. The authentication codes were valid, and the identity marker made Taijin's blood run cold. Ghost 7. Nari Kong. Emergency beacon activated. He sat down heavily in his chair. 20 years. She had made it 20 years without incident. They all had. 15 soldiers hidden across human space, living quiet lives under false identities, trying to forget what they had been. And now one of them was calling for help. Taijin accessed the restricted files that only he and 2 other people in the entire government could read. The treaty was clear. Any attack on a ghost, provoked or unprovoked, would be considered an act of war against humanity. The treaty had been written that way deliberately. The Valkyrie had wanted guarantees that the ghosts were truly gone. Humanity had given them guarantees that attacking the ghosts would end the peace instantly. He made 2 calls. The first was to President Hana Choi, waking her at 3 in the morning. The second was to Ambassador Kyung Soo Yoon, who was stationed at the Galactic Union headquarters. President Choi listened to his report without interruption. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Is she alive? The beacon is still transmitting. I have to assume yes. What are your orders, Admiral? Taijin took a deep breath. Bring the fleet to readiness. All of it. And pray that we do not have to use it. Kung Su arrived at Haven Colony 4 days later aboard a Union diplomatic ship. The Velkari patrol vessels were long gone, returned to their base with reports of a routine inspection. The colonists were nervous, talking in quiet voices about the shooting they had witnessed. No one had seen Nari since the incident. The warehouse was empty when Kung Su entered. The salvage was still there, piled in neat stacks. But the woman who owned it was gone. He walked slowly through the space, his trained diplomat's eye noting the details. The dust patterns on the floor, the small traces of blood near the entrance. And then he saw it. On the back wall, written in letters 3 feet tall, were words in the Velkari language. The paint was still wet, still dripping down the metal surface. But it was not paint. It was blood. The message was simple. You should not have missed. King Su called the local security force. They found the 3 Velkari soldiers who had stayed behind when the main force departed. They were supposed to be looting the warehouse, taking anything valuable before the colonists could hide it. Instead, they were dead. The kills were professional, clinical. Each soldier had been eliminated with a single strike to the critical nerve cluster at the base of their skull. The kind of kill that required perfect knowledge of Velkari anatomy and the strength to pierce their armored skin. The kind of kill that only one type of human could perform. King Su filed his report with shaking hands. He had been briefed on the ghosts when he took this assignment. Every human diplomat was. But reading about them and seeing their work were very different things. The report reached the Galactic Union Council the next day. They were dismissive. 3 dead soldiers were unfortunate, but hardly worth the emergency session that Kung Su was requesting. Probably criminals, they said. Probably a smuggling deal gone wrong. These things happened in the Outer Rim. The report also reached the Velkari High Command. Most of them had the same reaction as the Council. But one officer, Admiral Wanjin Shim, recognized the signature. He was old, nearly 200 years old, and he had studied the last war between humanity and the Velkari Empire. He knew what the ghosts had been capable of. He tried to warn his superiors. They laughed at him. The war was 900 years ago. No human soldiers from that era could still be alive. The stories about the ghosts were propaganda, exaggerations meant to scare an enemy that was already beaten. Wanjin was told to retire and stop bothering them with ghost stories. 3 days after the incident on Haven Colony, a Velkari refueling station reported a security breach. The patrol ship that had visited Haven was docked there, taking on fuel and supplies. The breach lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, the entire crew of the patrol ship was dead. 43 soldiers, killed without firing a single shot, except 2. Commander Reith and Officer Vakris were found alive in the ship's brig, locked in a cell. Between them, carved into the metal wall with something incredibly sharp, was another message. Tell them she is coming for everyone who knew and did nothing. The security footage was recovered and broadcast across the Galactic Union before anyone could stop it. The galaxy watched as a single figure in black and gray armor moved through the patrol ship like smoke. She was fast, impossibly fast. She killed with efficiency that was almost artistic. And at the end of the footage, she turned and looked directly at the camera. Her face was hidden behind a helmet, but her voice was clear. I am Ghost 7. I was attacked without provocation in neutral space. This is my response. The Treaty of Silence is void. The footage went viral. Within hours, every major news network in the galaxy was running stories about the return of the ghosts. Species that remembered the last war felt old fears resurface. Species that had never heard of humanity's military suddenly wanted to know everything. On Earth, Taijing watched the footage and felt pride mixed with dread. Nari was alive. She was operational. And she had just declared war on the Velkari Empire by herself. His console beeped with an incoming message. The encryption was the same as Nari's beacon, but the signature was different. Ghost 3. Colonel Jaewon Kim. The message was brief. Saw the news. Activating. Gathering the others. Will advise location. Taijin put his head in his hands. 13 more ghosts were about to come out of hiding. He needed to contact the president again. Across human space, men and women received encrypted messages. A university professor who taught ancient history. A farmer on a colony world. A merchant ship captain. A librarian. A construction worker. They all had different lives now, different identities. But they had all been something else once. Something deadly. One by one, they sent back the same response. On our way. The galaxy had enjoyed 900 years of peace. They had forgotten why that peace existed. They had forgotten what humanity was capable of when pushed. They were about to remember Dot, and this time there would be no treaty. This time there would be accountability. The Velkari Emperor Thraxus watched the footage for the 5th time, his 4 hands gripping the armrests of his throne with enough force to crack the stone. Around him, his advisors stood silent, waiting for him to speak. They had been waiting for nearly an hour. "One human," he finally said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "One human killed 43 of our trained soldiers." "How?" High Chancellor Vecthan shifted uncomfortably. "The reports say she was part of an old military program. Something from the last war. Our intelligence division is researching it now." "Research faster," Thraxus commanded. "And find this woman. Bring her to me alive." What the Emperor did not know was that finding Nari was the least of his problems. She had already moved on, vanished into the vast network of space stations and colony worlds that dotted the neutral zone. But she had not stopped. Every 3 days, another Velkari military installation reported an incident. Supplies destroyed. Weapons disabled. Soldiers found unconscious with no memory of what had happened. She was sending a message. She could strike anywhere, anytime. And they could not stop her. The Galactic Union called an emergency session. Ambassador Kyung-soo sat in the human delegation section, watching as the Velkari representative demanded action. The human criminal known as Nari Kong must be apprehended and turned over to Velkari justice. This is a matter of law and order. President Hana Choi stood to respond. She was a small woman, gray-haired and soft-spoken. Most of the other species in the council chamber barely paid attention to her. That was a mistake. The individual you mention is a registered civilian who defended herself against an unprovoked military attack in neutral space. Earth has no authority to detain her. Even if we could locate her, which we cannot. The Velkari representative's translator crackled with his anger. "You protect a murderer." Hana's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "We protect our citizens, just as you protect yours. If Officer Vekris had not fired without cause, none of this would have happened. Perhaps you should be having this conversation with him." The debate raged for hours. In the end, the Galactic Union passed a resolution condemning violence on both sides and calling for peaceful resolution. It was meaningless. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The peace that had lasted 900 years was unraveling, and no amount of diplomatic language could stop it. While politicians argued, something else was happening in the shadows. On a remote asteroid station in the Corvin sector, 14 humans gathered for the first time in 20 years. They embraced like family, because that is what they were. Brothers and sisters in ways that went deeper than blood. Colonel Ji-won Kim was the last to arrive. He had been a university professor, teaching military history to students who had no idea they were learning from someone who had made that history. He looked older now, lines on his face that had not been there during the war. But his eyes were the same, sharp and calculating. "Thank you all for coming," he said simply. A woman named Sora stepped forward. She had been Ghost 11, a specialist in intelligence gathering. For the last 2 decades, she had worked as a historian, documenting the truth about the war in secret archives. "We all saw what happened to Nari. We could not let her fight alone. The question is what we do now," said Ghost 4, a man who called himself Mino in his civilian life. "Do we fight? Or do we try to put this back together?" Jaewon looked at each of them in turn. Nari was shot for refusing an illegal search. The Valkyrie have violated the treaty in dozens of small ways over the years. They have been testing boundaries, seeing how much they can get away with. This was bound to happen eventually. "So we fight," said another ghost, a young-looking man named Junho, who had been a merchant captain. "No," Jaewon said firmly. "We do something harder. We remind the galaxy why the treaty existed in the first place. Why we agreed to hide ourselves. Not because we were defeated, but because we chose mercy." He activated a holographic display showing Valkyrie military movements over the past week. They are mobilizing. Not for full war, not yet. But they are preparing for it. Which means they will make a move soon. Something designed to force Earth's hand. Sora studied the data. A hostage situation. That is their style. Take civilians and force a surrender. Exactly, Jaewon agreed. And when they do, we will be ready. They did not have to wait long. 3 days later, a Volcari battle group intercepted a human medical ship in neutral space. The ship was carrying doctors and nurses to a colony suffering from an outbreak of plague. 53 civilians, all unarmed. The Valkyrie boarded the ship and took everyone prisoner. The message to Earth was simple. Surrender Nari Kong within 7 days, or the hostages would be executed on live broadcast. The executions would start with the ship's captain, a woman named Yuna Han, and the chief medical officer, Dr. Dong-Min Lee. The galaxy waited to see what humanity would do. Most expected Earth to negotiate. Some expected them to surrender. A few hoped they would fight. No one expected what actually happened. The Valkyrie were holding the hostages on Kethris Prime, a heavily fortified military world deep in their own territory. 50,000 soldiers were stationed there. Orbital defense platforms. Shield generators that could withstand sustained bombardment. It was one of the most secure locations in Valkyrie space. On the 6th day of the deadline, the 14 ghosts infiltrated the planet. They arrived using methods that had been classified beyond top secret during the war. Individual insertion pods that could mimic space debris, stealth fields that bent light and sensor waves. They landed on different parts of the planet and began moving toward the prison facility where the hostages were being held. The Valkyrie never saw them coming. The assault began at midnight local time. 14 humans against 50,000 Valkyrie soldiers, and the most advanced defensive systems in the Empire. The history books would later call it impossible. Military strategists would study it for centuries, trying to understand how it was done. The ghosts moved through Kethris Prime, like the name suggested, like spirits that could not be touched. They disabled communications first, cutting the facility off from reinforcements. Then they systematically took apart the defenses. Guard towers went dark. Sensor arrays stopped working. Patrols vanished without raising alarms. By the time the Valkyrie realized they were under attack, The ghosts were already inside the prison. Jaewon led the team that breached the detention center. The guards never had a chance to fight back. Within minutes, all 53 hostages were secured and moving toward the extraction point. The battle lasted 6 hours total. When it was over, the prison facility was destroyed. Orbital defense platforms were offline, and 3,847 Valkyrie soldiers were dead. The ghosts extracted all hostages with 0 friendly casualties, but they did not leave quietly. As they boarded their extraction ships, they broadcast a message to every military installation in Valkyrie space. Jaewon's face appeared on screens across the Empire, his voice calm and clear. We are the ghosts. We are humanity's response to aggression. For 900 years, we have remained hidden because we believed peace was possible. You have shown us we were wrong. This is your only warning. Dismantle your military. Retreat to your core worlds. Face justice for your crimes. You have 30 days to comply. The transmission ended. The ships vanished into faster-than-light travel before the Valkyrie could scramble interceptors. And the galaxy finally understood what Earth had been hiding for 9 centuries. Humanity had not disarmed. They had simply been waiting. Emperor Thraxus did not sleep for 3 days after the raid on Kethris Prime. His military advisors presented report after report, each one more disturbing than the last. 14 humans had penetrated the most secure facility in the Empire. They had killed nearly 4,000 trained soldiers, and they had done it in 6 hours. How many of these ghosts exist? He demanded. High Chancellor Vecthan consulted his datapad. Intelligence suggests 15 total. One is the woman from Heaven Colony. The others were identified from the Kethris Prime footage. 15. Thraxus repeated slowly. 15 humans brought down Kethris Prime. What could 15,000 do? What could 15 million do? No one answered. They were all thinking the same thing. If humanity had kept these soldiers hidden for 9 centuries, what else had they been hiding? Admiral Wanjin Shim, who had been dismissed as paranoid earlier, was recalled to active duty. He stood before the War Council and presented everything he had learned about the ghosts from studying the old war. They are not normal soldiers. They are enhanced. Stronger, faster, smarter. They heal from injuries that would kill others. They can survive in environments that would destroy unprotected beings. And they are trained in every form of combat known to the galaxy. How do we fight them? Asked General Kethris, whose military base still bore his name, despite being reduced to rubble. Wanjin shook his head slowly. We do not. Not directly. The old Empire tried. They sent armies. They sent assassins. They tried orbital bombardment. Nothing worked. The ghosts simply adapted and kept coming. Then how did the war end? Thraxus asked. Humanity chose to stop, Wanjin said quietly. They were winning. They could have destroyed us completely, but they offered peace instead. The treaty was their mercy, not their surrender. The Emperor's hands tightened into fists. You are saying we should surrender? Give them everything they demand? I am saying we should not have shot that woman on Haven Colony, Wanjin replied. But since we did, we need to decide if our pride is worth extinction. The debate in the War Council raged for hours. Some argued for immediate surrender. Others demanded total war. In the end, Thraxus made the choice that would seal his empire's fate. He chose pride. We mobilize everything, he ordered. Every ship, every soldier. If humanity wants war, we will give them war. Prepare a strike on Earth itself. If we cannot defeat their ghosts, we will destroy their home. It was the wrong choice. The Valkyrie fleet assembled in secret, gathering in the dead systems beyond the neutral zone. 3,000 warships, the largest military force assembled since the last war. They were equipped with weapons banned by 17 treaties, weapons they had been developing in secret for centuries. If they could not fight the ghosts, they would simply destroy everything from orbit. The fleet launched toward Earth 3 weeks after the Kethris Prime raid. They expected to catch humanity by surprise. They expected to arrive at a lightly defended world protected by outdated ships. They expected an easy victory. They were wrong about everything. When the Velkari fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system, they found themselves facing an armada. Not hundreds of ships, thousands. Ships of designs that had never been seen before, incorporating technology that should not exist. And at the center of it all, Admiral Taijin Park's flagship, broadcasting a simple message. "You were warned." Taijin's voice echoed across all frequencies. "You chose war. Now face the consequences." The space battle that followed was brief and brutal. The Velkari had numbers and weapons banned by treaty, but Earth had 900 years of secret development. Ships that could phase through shields. Weapons that struck from dimensions the Velkari could not even detect. Defensive systems that made their attacks useless. Within 2 hours, the Velkari fleet was destroyed. Not damaged, not defeated, destroyed. Of the 3,000 ships that had come to Earth, fewer than 100 escaped. The rest were turned into expanding clouds of debris that would orbit the sun for millennia as a reminder. But while the space battle raged, the ghosts were not participating. They had a different mission. Nari stood on the surface of the Velkari homeworld, invisible beneath her active camouflage. Around her, the other 13 ghosts waited in position. They had infiltrated during the chaos of the fleet launch, when every eye was turned toward the coming battle. Now they were in the capital city, meters from the Imperial Palace. Jaewon's voice came through her helmet communicator. "All teams in position. Defensive systems are offline. Begin insertion in 30 seconds." The palace was supposed to be impenetrable. It had guards stationed every 10 meters. Sensor systems that could detect a mouse. Shields that could withstand direct hits from orbital weapons. But none of those defenses were designed to stop Ghost's dot. They went through the palace like smoke through a screen. Guards were neutralized before they could raise alarms. Sensors were fooled by technology those guards did not know existed. Shields designed to stop energy weapons did nothing against soldiers who simply walked through the doors. Emperor Thraxus was in his war room when Nari found him. He was surrounded by his high command, watching reports of his fleet's destruction on the screens. He did not hear her enter. None of them did. One moment the room was secure. The next, 14 figures in black and gray armor stood among them. "Do not move," Jaewon said calmly. "You are all under arrest for war crimes." Thraxus reached for his weapon. Nari was faster. She had his arm twisted behind his back before he could clear the holster. The other ghosts had secured the rest of the command staff just as quickly. "You cannot do this," Thraxus gasped. "I am the Emperor." "You were the Emperor," Nari corrected. "Now you are a war criminal. There is a difference." They broadcast the capture live to the entire empire. Every Velkari citizen watched as their emperor and his entire high command were marched out of the palace in restraints. There was no battle, no destruction, just impossible precision and overwhelming force. The message was clear. Humanity could have killed them all. They could have reduced the capital to ashes. But they chose not to. They chose justice over vengeance, that the Velkari military, already shattered by the space battle, collapsed completely. Without leadership and without hope, they simply stopped fighting. Across the empire, soldiers laid down their weapons. Warships surrendered to local authorities. Within a week, the war was over, but the work of peace was just beginning. "Ambassador," Kang Shu stood before the Galactic Union Council once more. This time, they were listening. The Velkari Empire is dissolved as of this moment. The former emperor and his command staff will face trial for violations of the Treaty of Silence and for crimes committed during the so-called peace. These trials will be public and fair. The other species in the council chamber watched in silence. Some looked relieved. Others looked afraid. All of them were re-evaluating everything they thought they knew about humanity. Earth proposes a new treaty, Kang Su continued. One based on accountability rather than fear. One that protects all species from aggression. And one that keeps the peace through strength, not through pretending that strength does not exist. A representative from the Mirathi delegation stood. They were a small species, barely 4 feet tall, with large eyes that had sea. And too much suffering. The Velkari nearly destroyed our people 50 years ago. The Union called it a colonial dispute and did nothing. Will this new treaty protect us from such disputes? Yes, Jingsu said firmly. Any species that agrees to the new treaty will be protected, and that protection will be enforced. Over the next month, the details were worked out. The Accord of Remembrance, they called it. Every species that signed agreed to submit to binding arbitration for disputes. They agreed to limitations on military expansion. And they agreed that violations would be met with force from a coalition of peacekeeping, forces led by humanity. The ghosts would remain active. Not as assassins, not as soldiers, but as protectors. The sword that kept the peace sharp. NAR, I returned to Haven Colony 4 months after she had been shot. The warehouse had been cleaned up, the blood washed away. The colonists welcomed her back quietly, asking no questions. They had seen the news. They knew what she was. But she was still their neighbor. She stood in her warehouse, looking at the message she had written in Velkari blood all those months ago. Someone had preserved it, sealed it in crystal. Below it, a plaque had been added. You should not have missed. A reminder that peace requires vigilance. She smiled slightly and got back to work. There was salvage to sort. And somewhere in the galaxy, there was always someone who needed protecting. 3 years passed since the day a single shot ended 900 years of peace. The galaxy had changed in ways both visible and hidden. The Velkari homeworld was no longer the center of an empire. It was now the site of the largest war crimes tribunal in galactic history. Nari attended the trial on the first day. She sat in the public gallery, wearing simple civilian clothes, watching as Emperor Thraxus was led into the courtroom in restraints. He looked smaller than she remembered, broken. The weight of his choices had crushed something inside him. The chief judge was a Corvin, a species that had lost 2 entire colony worlds to Velkari aggression during the so-called peace. Her voice was steady as she read the charges. Emperor Thraxus, you stand accused of ordering attacks on neutral colonies, authorizing the execution of prisoners, and violating 17 separate treaty provisions. How do you plead? Thraxus said nothing for a long moment. Then finally, I did what I thought was necessary to protect my people. By attacking civilians? The judge asked. By executing medical personnel? By starting a war you knew you could not win? I did not know, Thraxus said quietly. None of us knew what humanity had become, what they had been hiding. That is not a defense, the judge replied. Ignorance of your enemy's strength does not justify aggression. The trial would last months. Dozens of former Velkari officers would be convicted. Some would be imprisoned. Some would be executed for the worst crimes. But the message was clear. The age of unchecked military power was over. Actions had consequences now. Nari did not stay for the entire trial. She had other work to do. The Accord of Remembrance had been signed by 47 species in the first year. By the second year, That number had grown to 73. Small species that had lived in fear of their larger neighbors suddenly had protection. Colonies that had been raided with impunity now had peacekeepers to call on. The peacekeeping force was led by humanity, but it included volunteers from dozens of species. They trained at a new facility on Earth's moon, learning tactics that had been secret for centuries. The best of them were taught by the ghosts themselves. Colonel Jaewon Kim had given up his university position to run the training program. He stood before a class of new recruits, representatives from 20 different species, all of them eager to learn. "You are not here to be soldiers," he told them. "You are here to be protectors. There is a difference. A soldier fights for territory or resources or honor. A protector fights only when there is no other choice, and only to defend those who cannot defend themselves." A young Mirathi recruit raised her hand. "But the ghosts are soldiers. You fought in the war." "We were soldiers," Jaewon agreed, "and we were very good at it. But being good at violence is not something to be proud of. It is a tool, nothing more. What matters is why you use that tool, and when you choose not to." The recruits absorbed this lesson, along with hundreds of others. How to de-escalate conflicts. How to read diplomatic situations. When to show force, and when to show mercy. It was a new kind of military, built not for conquest, but for protection. Meanwhile, across human space, the other ghosts had found their new roles. Sora had turned her secret historical archives into a public museum. The Museum of Remembrance, it was called. It told the true story of the last war, holding nothing back. The mistakes humanity had made, the atrocities committed on both sides, and the choice that had been made to end it through mercy rather than total victory. Children from 100 species visited the museum every day. They learned about the cost of war and the difficulty of peace. And they saw Nari's armor preserved in a display case, a reminder of what one person could do when pushed too far. Mino, who had been Ghost 4, now worked with the Corvan government to rebuild the colonies that had been lost. He brought human engineering expertise and resources that the Corvan could not have afforded on their own. Slowly, the dead worlds came back to life. Che-Unho, the former merchant captain, ran a shipping company that specialized in delivering supplies to species that had been cut off during the Valkyrie occupation. Medical supplies, food, building materials, all delivered at cost or free to those who needed it. Each ghost found their own way to serve the new peace. Some worked publicly. Others remained in shadows, ready to act if needed. But all of them carried the same message. Humanity would protect the peace, but not through fear. Through justice. President Hana Choi addressed the Galactic Union on the 3rd anniversary of the war's end. She was older now, ready to retire at the end of her term. But her voice still carried the same quiet strength. 3 years ago, one of our citizens was shot for refusing an illegal search. That single act of violence unraveled 900 years of carefully maintained peace. But it also revealed a truth we had all been avoiding. That peace was based on fear and silence, not on justice and accountability. She paused, looking around the council chamber. The new peace we are building is different. It is harder. It requires constant work and vigilance. It requires us to hold each other accountable for our actions. But it is real, and it will last because it is built on truth rather than comfortable lies. The speech was broadcast across the galaxy. In living rooms in command centers and colony meeting halls, billions of beings watched and listened. Some agreed. Some were angry. But all of them understood that the galaxy had changed forever. On Haven Colony, Nari worked in her warehouse as she had for 20 years. But the warehouse was different now. Part of it was still used for salvage operations. But part of it had been converted into a community center where colonists could gather. Children played in the yard outside. while their parents sorted through the day's haul of scrap metal. Nari showed a young girl how to identify different types of alloys, teaching her the same patience and attention to detail that had kept Nari alive through countless battles. "Miss Nari," the girl asked, "is it true you fought in a war?" Nari considered the question carefully. "I did. A long time ago? Was it scary?" "Yes, war is always scary. That is why we work so hard to avoid it." The girl nodded seriously, as if this was an important lesson to remember. Then she went back to playing with her friends, the conversation already forgotten. But Nari remembered. She remembered every battle, every choice, every life taken, and every life saved. Those memories were heavy, but she carried them willingly. They were the price of peace. That evening, she received a message on her secure communicator. It was from Jaewon. "New recruits are asking about you. They want to know if the stories are true. Should I tell them?" Nari smiled and typed back, "Tell them the truth. That I am a salvage operator who is in the wrong place at the wrong time. Everything else is just history." "They will not believe that," Jaewon replied. "I know. But it is still the truth." She powered down the communicator and walked outside. The twin suns were setting, turning the dust in the air into gold and crimson. It was beautiful in its own harsh way. Haven Colony was not paradise, but it was home. Somewhere in the galaxy, politicians were still arguing about the Accord of Remembrance. Military leaders were still adjusting to the new balance of power. Species were still learning to work together instead of fighting over scraps. But here, on this dusty colony on the edge of nowhere, there was peace. Real peace. The kind that did not require silence or fear. The kind that was built on mutual respect and the understanding that violence always had consequences. Nari had been a soldier for longer than most species had been spacefaring. She had fought in battles that would be studied for millennia. She had helped end an empire and birth a new age, but her greatest accomplishment was simpler. She had survived. She had chosen mercy when she could have chosen vengeance. And she had shown the galaxy that strength was not about the ability to destroy, but about the wisdom to know when not to. A single shot had ended 900 years of peace, but it had also started something new, something better. And as Nari watched the sun set over Haven Colony,